Every woman deserves to feel vibrant, safe, loved, and feel her power. The Woman's Vibrancy Code podcast is here for a potent use of your time. We will cover energy, hormones, and libido with episodes that also dive into entrepreneurship, money mindset, feminine power, and much, much more. Introducing Maraya Brown, Yale and functional medicine trained women's health expert, midwife, mom, and entrepreneur.
Okay, this is an exciting one because Nicole, our paths kind of are starting to intertwine a bit more. And I'm curious to see where it goes. So for everyone who's watching this, wherever you're watching this, I'm Maraya Brown. I'm a women's health expert, certified nurse midwife by training, been serving women for 20 plus years. And now pretty much all my work is online. Some of you are watching from Beyond the Red Tent, which is an online community where I get to vet experts with people and products around the world and bring them to women in a way that I think it's helping to offer you solutions, mind, body, and spirit for the journey that many women are longing for. And Nicole and I actually live in the same town in Ashland, Oregon. Mm-hmm. And I had seen her flyers a few different places, and she always looks so beautiful. And you know, like it looks like her work is really profound. And I kind of reached out saying it'd be fun to just start chatting. And we've had a couple lovely conversations. And then I had the opportunity to attend one of her breathwork sessions, which was spectacular. And then I actually brought Nicole into my intimate community with my program. And she did a chakra clearing meditation for the women. And I know for those of you that are watching this in the Women's Vibrancy Code, you might recognize Nicole's face. And I'm just watching the depth of the way in which she supports women. And then we just announced yesterday that the in-person retreat is live and happening. And Nicole is going to be the yoga instructor at the in-person retreat. And so obviously I respect her and I honor the work that she's doing in the world. So let me tell you a little bit about her. And once again, those of you watching in the Facebook world, wherever this is, you're welcome just to comment down below. We love hearts. We love it when you just say who you are, where you're watching from. And obviously, if there are real-time questions that pop up, we'll do our best to kind of filter those. So Nicole Doherty Ananda has been serving the wellness industry for 13 years as a women's empowerment coach, trauma-informed emotional healer, shamanic Reiki master, transformational breathwork trainer and facilitator, and ERYT 500 Yoga Alliance certified teacher trainer. Nicole, what does ERYT stand for?
ERYT, it's the registered yoga training. And when you get to a certain level where you have thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of teaching and training, it goes to E. It's like expert in a way. And it's for trainers, typically people who've been doing teacher trainings for a long time.
Okay. So you've been teaching yoga for a really long time, and now you get to teach the teachers.
Teaching the teachers, exactly.
Yeah. And so she's an expert in the realm of yoga, although I guess expert and the word yoga, those don't really match up.
How can you be an expert in yoga? That's what I say. You're always a beginner in yoga, actually.
Yeah. She's an expert beginner in yoga.
Expert beginner in yoga, yeah.
And she's also a mom. So she's the founder of the Priestess Within Sisterhood Facebook community, and her signature online course, Unleash the Priestess Within and Thrive, and podcast, Unleash the Priestess. She speaks on talk radio networks. She launched her first co-authored book on 2/22/22, Manifest Like a Goddess. And her mission is to empower women to heal their trauma and unleash their passion, power, and purpose in the world. So there's a couple links you'll see in the description for those of you that are in the Facebook world. For those of you listening to this on the podcast, it will be in the show notes. She has a 5-day chakra challenge to transform your trauma, embody your priestess power. And then I also put the link to the retreat where she's going to be teaching yoga. Okay. Hi.
Hi, wow. What an introduction. I just want to say I'm really grateful for being here. And I'm so honored that you showed up that day at the breathwork ceremony and you just were like taking it all in, because I know your expertise and what you stand for and who you are as well. So it's such a beautiful just reminder that, I'm doing the good work too, and to be recognized by another expert in your field and our field is really beautiful. And I'm grateful for that. So thank you.
I'm so glad that you started with that, because I believe, and I'm assuming that you also are in agreement with this, there's never an arrival. Like when women come into my space and they're like, oh, I already know all that. It's like, is there ever? No, we get to perpetually do our work and show up and allow ourselves to receive.
Yeah.
And in receiving, that's how we pour in and serve more greatly.
Absolutely, 100%. I'm a big believer in that too. And it is, we joke about the beginner, but that is my motto in life. It's like, I want to be a beginner in everything that I do, because I don't want to have that kind of egoic mindset. I want to be open to new teachings, new learnings, new possibilities always. I don't know all of it. Absolutely. So,
yeah. Well, and as a healthcare provider, I tried for too long to figure it out by myself. And then my thyroid and my adrenals crashed. And I realized, right, I don't need to be my own expert. It's okay. It doesn't mean that I'm not perfect. It doesn't mean that I'm not knowledgeable. It means I also get to receive.
Yeah. So big. And I love this place where we live, because there's so much women's work here. And it's such a loving and nurturing place. And so you bring that up. It's like, this is the first place I feel like I've really allowed myself to surrender at such a deep level into the feminine, into the nurturing. It's so exquisite. And I know it has to do with nature and Mount Shasta and the ley lines and the grid work and all the good, yummy things. And it's also the permission that I've given myself as well, so.
Yeah. Yeah. And you and I have lived in lots of amazing places, and I don't know about you, but traveled around the world, and coming back here to Ashland, Oregon, these mountains, man, they just call me in. I also lived in Hawaii for a long time, and that has a special place in my heart. But Ashland, so good. We're doing the in-person retreat in Ashland, Oregon. So for those of you like, oh, it sounds like a really great place, check out the link. Okay. So first question for you, can you tell me a little bit about your path as a yogi, healer, coach, and kind of how you came to being in this place of supporting women along their transformation and trauma work?
Yeah, the path is unfolded so exquisitely, as all of our paths unfold so divinely over the last, I'd say, 20 years that I've been practicing yoga. Before that, my history and my path was, kind of in a way on the outside would be perceived as something quite common, maybe, middle class, even like upper middle class, all the things on the outside looked pretty. On the inside, though, there was a lot of abuse and quite a lot of dysfunction in my household. And I found out when my dad died in 2001 that he was dying of HIV. And I had no idea that he was even sick. I knew he was unwell, like in certain times of his life, not feeling good, but it was always told to me that it was because of his travel, his international travel, and he was sick. But what was really going on was that he was dying of AIDS. And to find that out on your father's deathbed is quite shocking, as you could imagine. So I had to go through a lot of unpacking of childhood trauma. And it led me on a path of self-realization of yoga. I discovered yoga in 2001. I discovered things like law of attraction, Eckhart Tolle, all the people, Deepak Chopra. I just went on Louise Hay on a scavenger hunt, scouring all of the professional development books and allowing myself to go on the journey of discovering who I was, not who my parents wanted me to be, So I went to Georgetown, I got straight A's, I did all the right things, but I never felt fulfilled. I never felt connected to myself. I always felt like I was doing things for other people. And so when we talk about people pleasing, that's actually what really got me on the path of yoga, which led to many other modalities. Reiki, energy work, which led me to the jungles of Peru, which led me to facilitate plant medicine journeys for 8 years and work with medicine, and then breath work, and you name it. I just kept adding more and more modalities because I recognized that each modality was powerful, but it's also consistency that you need in order to create effective change, and not everybody resonates with all the things. So you kind of have to find the tools that you really resonate with on a deep level and commit, to consistency. And thus you start kind of your healing practice. Yeah.
That's a big story.
It's a big story.
Yeah. Especially, when you talk to your mother now about, was your parents were still married when he was fighting the HIV struggle?
Yeah. So my parents remained married the entire time for show, in a way. And my mom was a working mother, which was very rare actually in that time frame. Most of my friends, their mothers were stay-at-home moms, but my mom always chose to work. And she was a go-getter, my mom, but my parents worked together. So talk about a lot of stress and a lot of pain. Not only did they work together, so they had arguments about work and how they were going to move the business, but also my dad got sick in the early 80s. So I was probably only, 7 or 8 years old. And so they hid this. So can you imagine the amount of shame and the amount of guilt and the amount of fear? And it was new back then too, right? It was just coming online as a disease, and nobody really knew a lot about it. So there were a lot of unknowns. There was a lot of arguing in my household and a lot of lying. And even though I didn't know, I think about children and how perceptive they are and receptive, and they're like sponges and emotional receivers. So there was so much of that undercurrent happening in my life. I can only imagine, how that I do know now, but how that affected my nervous system, all of that, and my emotional system.
Well, and also the place that I go, because I do so much work in the realm of libido, is how did that impact their relationship and their sexual relationship, especially in a time period where I remember as a kid, going to big event out in Eastern Oregon. I don't know if anybody follows Osho or Bhagwan, the Rajneesh movement, but my mom spent time out there, and I spent a lot of time out in Eastern Oregon on that ranch. And I remember a time period where sterilizing cups was such a big thing, and no sharing silverware because nobody knew how it was being spread. And to think of the dynamics in their marriage and their relationship and their touch and their intimacy, and then how that got conveyed to you and what you've taken on from that piece.
Oh my God. And it's even crazier than that, because my mom was an ex-nun. So add that on top, right? Like, what a perfect storm. My mom came out of the convent and met my father, and she had no history really of dating or men or sexuality. Goes into the convent. Of course, we know we would imagine what that was like. And then when she comes out, I want to start a family. And now my dad was actually quite a sexual being. My dad was a very sexual person. He made jokes about sexuality. He was pretty out in the open in certain ways, sexually vibrant, I guess is how I would like to describe it, but also a closeted homosexual or bisexual, however you'd like to put that now. So it's really interesting. So there was a lot of confusion, because my mom was completely shut down for a religious perspective and reasons. And my dad was very sexual. So in a day like today, it might be a completely different story. number one, they probably wouldn't even be together. It wouldn't really make that much sense probably. But yeah, a lot of confusion. So for me, there was a lot of shame wrapped up in sexuality, obviously. And I had to learn about sexuality on my own. I didn't feel ever safe to talk about that. In fact, it was shamed in my household. And because of my dad, I believe he overly was controlling. Obviously he became very controlling about, don't wear this, I don't want you going here. He was very nervous. And now I understand why about sex, but then they never spoke about it either. So it was more of a control. And then subsequently, I became very rebellious. I was the Catholic schoolgirl gone wild type. I wanted to leave the house and sneak out and have sex and do all the things because it was so repressed and suppressed in my house. So I went on a wild journey. I was a wild party girl for a long time.
Well, and now you do work with trauma in your program and with women and with yourself. And I imagine part of that is just allowing ourselves to express and work through our trauma in a very individual way. Could you talk a little bit about your work with trauma specifically?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I have a very unique, I feel like, lens for trauma because of my background in history and so many alternative healing modalities and Eastern modalities. I always gravitated towards them. I loved yoga and I loved Eastern philosophy. But when I came across this chakra system, I came across the chakra system early in yoga, and it was like one of those remembrances. I just thought, I know this information. This is what I need to know. Subtle body energy. And as I learned through the years, as I really dove deeply into the architecture of the chakra system, I recognized it's literally an Akashic library. It's an Akashic record of our life, of our early childhood development. So the way that I use this with trauma is with coaching, kind of Western psychology principles, but I apply it with the chakra system. And in tandem, I'm using coaching and healing modalities, breathwork, yoga, other things, Reiki, etc., to unpack the stories, the narratives, the conditioned beliefs, the behaviors, the stories we tell ourselves, right, as relates to where in the body those programs actually exist. So you're understanding your subconscious programming and then pairing that with other integrative healing tools. So you can actually clear and rebalance the chakra system. It's really currents of energy. In the yogic system, they call it the liberating current and the manifesting current. So as we're understanding how we're programmed through these chakras, I literally think of them as CD-ROMs, ones and zeros, just being programmed. Once we understand the programming, we can start to rewrite the story. We can clear the viral programs, literally like a computer, and then reprogram them. So it's kind of unique. I feel I don't know too many people who do it that way, but that's the way that I approach trauma.
And so I'm thinking, okay, can we have some examples? Like, for instance, a woman who is struggling with really painful menstrual cycles or infertility, a woman who is struggling with lots of GI disturbances, a woman who feels like she doesn't ever quite feel like she belongs in community. And, I can think of my own version of where that would embed in the body from a chakra system perspective and old trauma. Would you give some examples in kind of that through that lens of what stories might be present from the past and how they present themselves in a woman's body or experience of her life?
Yeah, absolutely. So you brought up a couple of really good examples. So there was the last one that you were talking about, whether she belongs or not. So belonging, as an example, actually lives in the first chakra. I matter, I belong, I'm here. So there's certain kind of affirmations and things that I use, but that's a very root chakra experience. It's tribal, it's primal, it's survival. Do I belong? If I don't belong, am I getting kicked out of the tribe? Will I survive? It goes into survival mode. So as I work through in linear time with people, we will start to unpack those different stories at each level. So that would be a root chakra story. And we'd find out, well, from birth to, let's say, 2, when that chakra was being developed, what was going on in your life? How was your birth? Was it traumatic? There's certain birth types that create different stories. And so we would unpack some of that. And we would also talk about, right now, are your basic needs met? What triggers you into survival now? And apply it to her real time. If I don't belong in this particular women's group, or I'm feeling, okay, let's use that as an example right now, and then apply it to the first times that you felt that, and then reapply it now so that you can feel like you belong. So we're always going kind of back to the history and then back to the present in real time to understand how we can actually move forward with action. So don't keep people in the past. Mm-hmm. Secondarily, you mentioned fertility. Fertility, ovaries, second chakra. This is sexuality, sensuality, creativity, masculine, feminine balance, relationships, etc. So I would try to understand what happened in her early childhood from that perspective, with her mother and her father, what their relationship was, what was her relationship to her own sexuality. If they had a story like mine, there's a lot to unpack. So we have to understand that stuff. And how does that affect in real time your cycle? And what can we do now with your cycle, as you do with women, to always be learning more about that second chakra, to support that second chakra, to do things like dance or movement or, libido enhancing exercises, maybe even breath work, to support that area. So it kind of goes up. Digestive, you brought up digestive, so it was great. You went 3, you went 2, 3, 1, I think, or the way you're example. I'm just flipping them to 1, 2, 3 in a linear time. Yeah. Digestive issues, our third chakra, a lot, and second chakra too, but our confidence. Do we feel confident, and do we have high self-esteem? Do we not? And what's blocking our energy? How are we leaking our energy? I mean, I could go on and on and on, but it's deep, it's understanding the physicality, but also what the mind is telling you, like your subconscious thoughts. And then also, though, your energy, how do you feed your energy, or how do you leak your energy? What are you doing with your energy? And also your emotions, right? And the emotions can be such a huge bridge between all of those things, and allowing ourselves to release our emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And the topic of this is from people pleaser to feminine power. So I think, like, the people pleaser, the not speaking the voice, and feminine power. But I imagine that people pleaser to feminine power relates to every single chakra. And so you go through that systematically with women, retelling new stories, going back to where the memory started. I love that you brought up childbirth. As a midwife, I think it's probably fair to say that all of us had some aspect of trauma in our birth. It's a big experience. If nothing else, your head was squeezed really, really, really tight. And then it was the first time of feeling touch and sensation and experiencing light. And, it's so jarring from one place to the other. Even for those beautiful home births that were ecstatic and quiet, and, it's still a big, my daughter always says, "Mom, does childbirth hurt?" And I said, "No, but it's intense."
Yeah.
Like bringing life into the world. It's intense.
Oh my gosh, is it intense? I told my friends it was like having a ping pong match with God. Because it's like you're doing, these contractions. It's like you're inhaling and you're exhaling, but the contractions, it feels like a freight train is coming, and you're just in this match of energy, just pushing, and then, right? Like, oh my gosh, is it intense? Is it intense? Just the most
such a
miraculously intense experience.
Spectacular opportunity for surrender. Anyway, I could talk about birth for a long time. What about your shadow work? So I know that there's work around trauma, there's work with chakras, but then shadow work as well. And particularly the people pleaser shadow behavior that you see in women. I'm wondering, with healers, coaches, women, whomever you work with, what does the shadow work look like?
Yeah, shadow work is so deep and it's such a beautiful practice. And I would say I came into shadow work at the deepest level in the last several years of my life. And when I understood the concepts, it completely radically changed my life. And of course, having the chakra system as kind of my lens for life, I started to apply the shadows to the chakras, which is really interesting. So victim nature, shadow work is really understanding where you first became or understood yourself to be powerless, even though I don't believe that any of us are powerless, but it's the ego's version of powerlessness. So that can happen immediately. It's like the first separation. In a way, it is birth. It's separating from source. So if we're developing as an individuated, unique version of source, we're going to have that story of separation. That's how we go through this life and learn in this, in yoga, they'd say the whole thing's an illusion until we go back to source. But we have to kind of believe that we're separate. And so we sometimes view our lives as victims, powerless against life, until one day we recognize that that's actually not true, that we're co-creators with life and universe and source, or as source even, right? But so the shadow work is really cool because it's really the behaviors that you adopt. They're called shadow behaviors, the behaviors that you adopt from that understanding that somehow you don't have power. So then martyrdom, as an example, is taking other people's pain and making it yours, and not expressing your needs or your desires, shutting down your voice. And that is really martyrdom. So you don't get your desires or your needs met. You sabotage yourself often. And then there's the opposite of the victim is really the perpetrator. It's like, if I'm a victim, there has to be a perpetrator. And if there's a perpetrator, there needs to be a victim. Someone's going to be in blame and shame, and someone's going to feel powerless. And then the opposite of the martyr, I would say, is the people pleaser. So the people pleaser is another version of powerlessness that goes outside of oneself to receive validation because internally she actually doesn't feel good enough. And I see this a lot in healers, in coaches and therapists, in subtle forms. And that's why it's called the shadow. It's very hidden and it can be very subtle as well. I was a people pleaser forever and I didn't even know it. Had no concept. And when I was asked to find my own people pleaser, it was so hidden that I couldn't figure it out. I was like, what are you talking about? I don't even get it. And then one day I woke up and I was like, oh my God, I'm the ultimate people pleaser. Oh my God. Because I had to note all the resentments that I had. And when I started to recognize that, wow, I have a lot of resentments, or, oh, I take care of everybody else but me, or I'm always wrong. That's the bit of the martyr. And all of these people need to be saved. Mine comes from my dad and my mom. Like, I wanted everyone to be happy because everybody was so unhappy. So I did everything in my power to make sure that everybody outside of me was happy, so things would feel safe. So people pleasing a lot of times has to do with control, making sure that we control our environment to feel safe. And we do that, and people pleasing is really interesting. It's also like not having healthy boundaries. And as mothers, I found this to be very true with a lot of the mothers that I know well, who I love dearly, like not taking care of themselves at all, because now their child is the most important person on the planet. And this is true that our child is very important, but if you're not well, as we know, like oxygen mask first, then your child's not going to be well, and your child's going to feel all of it. And I really started to understand that after I had my child, and I got sick, and I was people pleasing. I was in a toxic relationship. I was supporting a lot of things that were against my core values, and I was just depressed and sick. And I was not able to really care in a good way, in the way that I know I can, my son. And so I was like, okay, this is not good.
I'm so glad you're sharing all this. For anyone who's in my space, this is something I talk about all of the time. No permission needed. That it is a requirement that we prioritize ourselves and allow ourselves to receive. And on the other side, it's us being the martyr. And I think sometimes it really does come from our need to control. And somehow there's a lack of safety to surrender to receiving. Yeah. And we think that we're doing such a good job. Look at all the people that I'm serving in my community and my husband and my friends and my children. And then I'm like, okay, but you're saving the table scraps for yourself. You're giving from a cup that's empty, and then what version of you are you giving when you're not prioritizing yourself? And what example are you living, particularly for the mothers? We have to look ourselves in the mirror and say, yes, I'm pouring out and they are our ultimate gift to the world. Yes. But they do what we do, not what we say.
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want them to be, self-responsible, then that's the key to really being and showing up for people, is your own version of self-responsibility and your own version of trust.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't trust yourself and you can't be self-responsible, how can we have our kids be trusting and self-responsible? And agree with getting yourself taken care of, because they're mimicking everything that we do. Everything.
Yeah. So you call this shadow work?
I call that shadow work, the hidden versions of yourself, these behaviors.
And then my verbiage is helping women look in the mirror again. Like I say, often they're saying, I don't recognize who I see, or they're maybe afraid to look the lioness in the mirror. And what I'm hearing from you is we get to actually look at the shadow or move the shadow out of the way. And then we look ourselves and we see the lioness in the mirror. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
The shadows, I would say, are simply a shadow has no light, right? So I like to think of like a flashlight. When we turn our light, when we turn our attention, our awareness to the shadow, we start to illuminate it. And once we illuminate that and we're aware of these behaviors, we can actually shift them. It's just simply an awareness. And then I shouldn't say simply, because some of these behaviors are very ingrained, aren't they? Through lineage, generational, women in general, patriarchal society, like all the things in the environment. And it's a practice, just like anything else. I would say yoga is a practice, breath work's a practice, meditation's a practice, shadow work's a practice,
And I heard you say it has no light, but the irony is it requires light. There is no shadow without light.
That is true. That is true. And so I guess not semantics, because everything is poignant what you say. So let's reframe it right now and say, I want to say this, you're always light. Your light has never left you. Like, that's a really important piece of understanding too. And I say this even on my website, you're more powerful than any trauma you've ever experienced, because your light is so darn big and so immense and incredible, but we forget and we dim. So you're absolutely correct, Maraya. It's like, it's not that there's no light. It's a shadow. It's less seen. It's less illuminated.
It's almost like we're getting in our own way. We're getting in the way of the light. And so then instead the gaze is on the shadow. And what I heard you say is you're more powerful than any trauma you've experienced. So strong. Okay. So I know the women that are leaning in going, oh, this is good. And you have a challenge coming up called Embody Your Priestess. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it's a 5-day virtual all live challenge. I've run it a few years, but I change it every year a little bit. And this time we're going to go fully live. And I wanted to do this because it used to be all recorded, but I want people in there. It's just like, if we're going to do the work, like I want people to do the work in real time, because that's really my juice and my love and passion too. Yeah. But it's 5 days. We go through what's called the lower triangle. There's my little my little visual. It's the bottom 3 chakras. And these are considered the manifest reality or our earthly chakras. And we gave examples earlier, which is fantastic because a lot of our childhood trauma actually exists in those 3 chakras. Once we understand that from a perception point of view, we can bring more awareness to it. So this is about bringing awareness to that information. Obviously, we can't do it, you know this. It's like when a big body of work, you get to just kind of touch the surface of the understanding and the teachings. And then I do have a little bit of a workbook and action items and things that they do. And I coach people within that process. And we all kind of do it together. So we talk a little bit about core wounding. We do talk about fear and trust. We'll talk about sensuality, sexuality, health. And we'll talk about confidence, self-esteem, or if you have like lack of self-esteem and things like that. So it'll be about getting grounded and feeling easeful and confident.
I love that you do that. It's most of the women in my space know I do a Vibrant Life workshop, and it's very similar. And I love offering it up live because everyone is so different. And for the women that are on live, it's real-time banter. Like we're in there sharing an energetic exchange as it's happening and coming up with the roadmap and the solution. So I'm so glad you're doing that, and that there's going to be a workbook along with it. And so in the description or in the show notes, if you're listening to this in the podcast, you'll see the link to Nicole's Facebook as well as Instagram, and the link to register for the free 5-day challenge. And then there's also the link to the retreat. That's the in-person retreat in June. If you want to come and receive yoga facilitation from Nicole. All right. Random question. Drum roll, please. What do I want to ask? What's your spirit animal?
Ooh, the hummingbird.
Mine too.
Oh my gosh, really? I love that. I love sharing spirit animals with people. Joy. Well, I can see that on your face.
Yeah. How did you know, or when did you know?
Oh, this is actually a really cool story. I was down in Peru. I was doing a plant dieta. So in dietas, you are in silence and by yourself for anywhere from 7 days to a year, depending on what plant you're dieting. And this was called Ayahuma. And it was for facilitation because they knew that I was a facilitator. So I would drink this plant in the morning, and we would have very limited food. And then I would just stay in meditation. Well, one day I was meditating and I saw hummingbird. I saw a few come into my frame, and they would just kind of hang out there, and they were like telling me stories. And what happened was I walked outside of my tambo, and then in real time, in physical reality, a hummingbird, a hummingbird, a hummingbird. And they literally stood in front of me, flying, with their wings, just talking to me. I mean, it was the most bizarre. I felt like I was Mary Poppins. And then I followed them. I followed them down a trail, and they brought me to an entire area filled with hummingbirds. And the sound and the tone of that was so incredible. Yeah. It was this deep kind of, sound, and they were all dancing. It was incredible. They were in these infinity, like waves of energy. And I saw all of them, and I just was flabbergasted, blown away, and so much joy. It was such an exquisite experience. So, and then I looked it up, and I knew, I was like, this is it. Cause I want to bring joy to people,
Yeah. Ultimately. Mine is very similar. So I did it's either a 4 or a 5-day vision quest.
Oh my God.
And so I was in a 10-foot circle with just water, and I had a sleeping bag, and there were individuals, and it was a Peruvian tradition. And it was actually here in Southern Oregon up at Earth Teach.
Okay.
Fascinatingly, for the retreat, we're going to be taking everyone up to Earth Teach, and we're walking the labyrinth up there. And this is where I was questing. And so we had people holding space for us and eating at the base camp. And so I was there in my 10-foot circle for 4 days. And every day a hummingbird came and hung out with me. And it would stand on the branch, and I was by a little creek, and it would take a bath in the creek and just hang out with me. And I finished that vision quest just knowing that somehow hummingbird is my energy. The irony is there's no hummingbirds in Hawaii.
Oh my gosh, really?
There's no hummingbirds. There's no hummingbirds in Hawaii.
Well, we just can't live there then.
I know.
I love Hawaii, but it's got no hummingbirds.
But it's amazing. I don't know about you, but anytime a hummingbird comes into my existence, it's always a message.
Oh yeah. And I even was doing yoga with one of my clients once, and he asked me the same question as you. By the way, what's your spirit animal? I said, it's the hummingbird. And literally, no joke, he will attest to it. The hummingbird came over and sat right next to us and then flew away. And he was like, what? I mean, he was like, did you orchestrate that? Is there a hidden camera? Is that
Yes. Yes.
No, I love it. That's amazing.
So good. All right. Anything else that feels unsaid or that just feels needed to feel like this interview is complete for the women that are listening? Oh, well, and I'm sure that there are men listening too. I forget. My work is all with women, but it's for the individuals that are listening to this.
I would just say, because we're both in wellness and self-care, and we talked about the people pleaser, just how important self-care is, and to really make it a number one priority. As much as we, this is what came up when you mentioned it earlier about children. If our child is sick, we would do anything, right, to make sure that they get better. But we have an inner child. We have an inner child. And so we need to do the same thing for our inner child. We always need to ensure that she or he is taken care of. And that's really our life force as a creative genius.
Yeah. So. And when you say sick, I think it's important to acknowledge that sick manifests in lots of different ways. It can be just a feeling of sadness. It can be a feeling of unfulfillment. It makes me think of the word Aini. I'm assuming that you know that word.
Sacred reciprocity.
Yeah. Would you talk a little bit about Aini?
Aini means sacred reciprocity, and it's a shamanic. Well, I know it from the shamanic term, which is I want to say despacho ceremonies is where I actually really learned it. So despacho ceremonies are about sacred Aini, where you give blessings and offerings to spirit, earth, etc., and in return you receive their blessings. So it's reciprocity with the earth and with the unseen realms. But it is the law of giving and receiving, to put it in its simple terms, the law of giving and receiving.
Yeah. And I think of it as a place where in this idea of being the martyr or the victim, or not speaking up for ourselves, not allowing ourselves to receive, it's when the Aini, the sacred reciprocity, gets out of balance. And my understanding of Aini is that it's the origin of all illness. When there is that imbalance, it's like the trees and the plant kingdom, they're always in sacred reciprocity with they're giving us oxygen to breathe. We're giving them carbon dioxide to take in. I mean, I could give so many examples. And so in the act of prioritizing ourselves and allowing ourselves to receive, that's where we prevent illness, because it allows for the energetic exchange of sacred reciprocity, and it can play out in money, in love, in wellness. I mean, I think it plays out in everything. Anyway.
I love that you brought it to that. That's beautiful. And that's so true, right? Balance, harmony.
Right. So the harmony from at times being the people pleaser and at times being in our feminine power. And I love your work to be able to go in and address the old trauma and the old stories and clear and clean out the chakra system so that we're allowing ourselves to receive and prioritize ourselves and creating that balance between, at times we are going to be giving and pleasing, and at other times we will be receiving and in our feminine power. And there has to be both.
Absolutely. And it brings me back to kind of that concept of liberation and manifestation too, because there are going to be times where we're moving to clear our system, to liberate, to get up into, let's say, God, source. And then we're asked, I mean, look at our bodies. We are receivers of energy, to bring that down and create, right, with our imagination in dense matter. So we're doing both. We're not just here to escape our bodies. We're here to actually, that's why I call it embody, to also embody, to bring the teachings down to earth, to create heaven on earth, that concept, which is balance, which is harmony. I love that you brought it there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So register for her 5-day challenge. Come join us for the retreat, and let's gather in physical form and circle up as women together. And Nicole, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the you that you're being in the world and the way that you're showing up as a priestess and empowering women all over. I know it's phenomenal. And I'm grateful to share this planet with you.
Oh my gosh. I just love you to pieces. I just want to give you a big old hug.
We will.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I'm so grateful to be a part of all the things that you're offering. I know the value and the depth that you offer as well to women and how empowered they are through you. So thank you. Thank you, sister. Yeah.
Absolutely. And thanks to all of you that have tuned in and stayed in and received. And I know that we've had an exchange here. So thank you for receiving, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to give, because there's another example of Aini at work. And so cheers to all of you.
Wasn't this episode amazing? Let's distill it down to key takeaways and action steps.
All right. In recap, what a phenomenal conversation with Nicole Doherty. I love that you are more powerful than your trauma. The conversation that we had around resentment and martyrdom, and oh my goodness, weren't you just blown away by her story of her childhood? So if you take nothing else from this, I hope that you allow a little bit more space for sacred reciprocity in your life, to create spaciousness to receive, to know that you are a priority and you do not need permission. I hope that you register for her 5-day challenge. You're always welcome to come into my workshops that are similar and live, called the Vibrant Life Workshop. And for those of you that are curious about an in-person retreat and you're listening to this before June of 2022, check that link out in the show notes. Maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to all give each other big hugs, and you'll be able to receive yoga and healing work from Nicole, while also receiving my love that I have to give for you along your journey of transforming your energy, your hormones, and your libido, plus Priestess Graelle, sexologist Eva Clay, and much, much more. Cheers to your journey, and cheers to you prioritizing yourself.
Thank you for listening to the Woman's Vibrancy Code. Connect with us and take the first step to transforming your energy, hormones, and libido at thewomansvibrancycode.com. Cheers to your zest and vitality. Make sure to follow for weekly power-packed value.